Shabbat Shalom. As Rabbi Sapedin mentioned, this Shabbat is the confluence of multiple events which will shape history going forward. The anticipated release of Israeli hostages who have been held in captivity for 470 days, the inauguration of a new president, and the commemoration of Martin Luther King Day, which grounds us again in moral courage. We stand on the precipice of change. This morning, as you know, we also begin reading the book of Exodus anew, and a new book feels like a new start. Like so many, I find myself yearning to reach the later chapters in Exodus, when the Israelites will ultimately be released from bondage, which clearly parallels the impatience so many feel while waiting for the hostages to return home. In this portion, as you heard earlier, we have the signal event in Moses' life, his encounter with God at the burning bush, the bush which burned yet was miraculously, mysteriously not consumed. And from its flames emerges God's voice, designating Moses as God's spokesperson, even though he felt himself ill-suited because of his speech impediment. How often, in my rush to lift up Moses and cheer his abilities and acknowledge the immense challenge of speaking truth to power, have I swept through the earlier verses, my attention drawn by that burning bush. Everything along the way seems like a predicate to the real drama. Yet it is often on the smaller stages of life in the personal arena that we as individuals are able to clarify our values and act on them. Before we meet Moses, there are others who deserve their due for what they can teach us about conscience. And I invite you now to turn your attention to the text study sheet. You may have one in hand, or feel free to view it on the screen. And in addition, if you have a JPS Tanakh, it begins on page 113 with verse 15. Exodus chapter 1, beginning with verse 15, reads as follows. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, oh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dwelt well with them, with the midwives, and the people multiplied and greatly increased. And God established households for the midwives because they feared God. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. And now that you have the context, I want to return to the first sentence. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah. Biblical commentator Nachum Sarna makes this observation. Isn't it interesting that the names of the midwives are recorded, but not those of the reigning pharaohs. In the biblical scale of values, these lowly champions of morality assume far greater importance than do all the powerful tyrants who ruled over Egypt. Their defiance of tyranny constitutes history's first recorded act of civil disobedience in defense of a moral imperative. And before we get ahead of ourselves, it's worthwhile to note that nowhere else in the Bible do Shiphrah and Puah appear. And it should not surprise you that throughout Jewish life, many women in the Bible remain unnamed, known only as the wife of, the daughter of, the mother of. While Pharaoh's personal name is subsumed by his title here, the midwives are honored by name. Yet what is not evident in translation remains a question in the Hebrew text. Just who were Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives? Were they Hebrew midwives or midwives of the Hebrews? That question has bothered generations of readers. The biblical commentator Samuel David Luzzatto, along with others such as Abarbanel, asks us to consider the circumstances and pointedly questions, could Pharaoh realistically have expected Hebrew women to murder their own people's children? Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explains this further, and here we turn to the second text on your handout. The Torah's ambiguity on this point is deliberate. We do not know to which people the midwives belonged, because their particular form of moral courage transcends nationality and race. In essence, they were being asked to commit a crime against humanity, and they refused to do so. All we know about them is that they feared God and did not do what the Egyptian king had commanded. In those words, a precedent was set that eventually became the basis of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which states, recognition of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. By refusing to obey an immoral order, Shiphrah and Puah redefined the moral imagination of the world. Rabbi Mira Beth Wasserman leans into this same idea, teaching, today new historical realities can enlarge our imagination. We can imagine the righteous Shiphrah and Puah as Egyptians because we have learned that care and trust and friendship and love cross all lines of separation. We have seen allies take risks for us, some because of principles of justice and truth, other because of bonds of caring and connection. The story of the Egyptian midwives is a story for anyone who could recede into self-protection, but instead chooses to step outside of their own comfort and safety and to take risks for others. So what propelled them? What gave these two women the courage to stand up. In fact, stand against the ruling Pharaoh personally ordered them to uphold. Only one thing, and the text says it very clearly: fear of God. As you know, the root of the Hebrew word, yirah, means both fear and awe. A striking example of fearing God is apparent to us in the Holiness Code in Leviticus, where we see that it means obeying God's ethical imperative. When it instructs, "You shall not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind," we are given the unequivocal rationale, "Thus shall you show that you fear your God. I am the Lord." But in Exodus here, it was awe that strengthened the midwives sufficiently so that they could defy Pharaoh's ruling. As Rabbi Sachs explains, the midwives teach us the primacy of conscience over conformity, the law of justice over the law of the land. When Shifra and Puah are called before Pharaoh to account for their behavior, they externalize the blame when they claim that the Hebrew women are chayot, vigorous. Now, that word chayot can convey a number of things. Rabbi Danya Rottenberg explains it like this: the midwives engage in a skillful game of double entendre. On one hand, using the word chayot, full of life, could refer to the Israelite women's vitality. It could be, however, that it refers to another meaning of the word, as Rashi suggests, and that is that they are animals. It may be, she explains, that the midwives, understanding Pharaoh's agenda and hearing his rhetoric, think that their ruse will be more likely to be believed if they present it to him in his own language, or in a language that seems to support his beliefs or agenda. Just as you devalue the lives of Hebrew children, Shifra and Puah seem to be saying, we will reflect your baseless values using the same despicable language that you understand. In 1996, in a briefing paper presented to the U.S. State Department, the human rights organization Genocide Watch included referring to a population of human beings as animals or vermin or insects plays a key role in the genocidal playbook. Debasing, dehumanizing, and defaming is a tactic as old as the Bible, one which makes it easier to dismiss the inherent worth of another. It is, in fact, a vibrant part of anti-Semitism throughout the years, anti-Zionism most recently, and frequently appears in other aligned political streams. Now, rulers and rule makers are always testing the water. And if they find that their initial ruling isn't followed, hasn't been successful, if it receives pushback or is ignored, they have to go back and assess how to respond. And one hopes that they will understand and read the will of the people and so abandon their cruel efforts. But too often, they regard it as an invitation to double down. And now I invite you to look at verse 22. When Pharaoh failed with Shiphrah and Puah, he charged his entire nation to fulfill his executive order, thereby making every citizen a participant in his ruthless endeavor to kill Hebrew boys, but spare the girls. Shiphrah and Puah acted when so many could not. Their bravery made it possible for all that was to come. Later, as you know, when Yocheved gave birth to Moses, she could look to the defiant strength Shiphrah and Puah modeled and find within herself the courage necessary to defy Pharaoh's decrees as well. When Moses' basket is found floating in the Nile by none other than Batya, Pharaoh's daughter, she exhibited the same moral courage when the boy's cry moved her to respond knowingly, "This must be a Hebrew child." The Talmud explores this remarkable act when she asks her servant to fetch the baby. They warn her that she is violating her father's decree. And how does she react? She courageously stretches out her own hand and takes Moses into the palace where he is raised as her son. And now please turn to the third text. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King challenges us with his words. Courage, he said, is an inner resolution to go forward despite obstacles. Cowardice is submissive surrender to circumstances. Courage breeds creativity. Cowardice represses fear and is mastered by it. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? In the coming days, there will surely be many times when we ask, is it right? And there will be moments, hours, weeks, when what we know to be right could be just out of reach. In those times of question, those times of uncertainty, may we summon the strength of Shiphrah and Puah and remember that we can begin to respond by acting on the small stage of our own lives. And that will help us focus our actions on what we can do. Also, Shiphrah and Puah acted together as one. So may we seek others who see the world as we do and add our strength to theirs. May we continue to have the courage to protect those who are vulnerable, to challenge what is unjust, to enlarge our moral imagination, to envision the world as it could be. Hereafter, I hope Shiphrah and Puah will take their place among the many exemplars of righteousness who help foster our courage when we falter. And let us remember, too, that when Queen Esther was reluctant to step into her authority and advocate for her brethren, Mordecai reminded her, "Who knows if you have been called for just such a moment?" Shifra and Pua know the answer. You have. Shabbat Shalom. May this be a time of enduring peace in our nation and in Israel.